Hi, my name is Jack Zucker. I'm the author of Sheets of Sound for Legato Guitar, and I wanted to talk a little bit about pick technique and why I changed my pick technique to accommodate the legato picking that I'm now doing. First of all, if you didn't know my background, I studied with Pat Martino for a couple years. During that period of time, I was doing heavy alternate picking, and if you've studied Pat Martino's music at all, you know he's famous for doing these types of lines, and I'm going to play this the way I used to play with my hand touching down onto the pickguard. So that's kind of a Pat Martino feel and a Pat Martino groove. The way I play now, and this was a change I made about 3 months ago, I'm not touching my fingers down to the pickguard anymore. I'm holding my hand. I'm not totally floating because I have a little bit of a reference point. The heel of my hand is touching the low E string. But so basically I feel like I'm about 70% of where I am with the finger touching down. And again, my fingers weren't touching down like a hard touch down like Steve Morse does. More like I'm kind of letting the fingers trail along the pickguard as I play. But there were a number of things that were limiting in that former technique and as to why I've switched, and here are a few of them. So first of all, if I want to incorporate any fingerstyle play, so if I want to do something like I can do that now without having to switch techniques. Previously, I played a lot of fingerstyle stuff in my playing as well, but what I had to do is I was touching my hand down and I might have to do something like this. And then I'd have to lift my hand up. And then I'd have to touch it back down when I started picking again. And then I'd have to lift it back up to... So I felt that it was a kind of an on or off thing, that I had to either be playing with the pick or playing with my fingers. And with the new technique, without touching down, I feel like I can intermix the two techniques a little better. I can actually seamlessly go between pick and fingers and use pick and fingers at the same time without losing any feel. The other thing is, before, if I were playing a fingerstyle line and needed to play something with a pick, I either did what I said a minute ago, which is that I'd put my finger down, or I'd play without touching my finger down, and then the attack wasn't quite right because my hand just wasn't used to attacking the strings without being touched down as a reference point. So that's one thing. The other aspect that I enjoy now with playing without touching down is that distance-wise, I no longer have to worry about the distance between my reference point, which used to be the fingers on the one side of the string, like the E string here, and then trying to stretch my hand out to play on the low strings. Now I can just move my hand up and down, whether I'm playing on the low string or if I'm playing on the high string, my hand is further down. So I feel like it's giving me a broader range and more of an ability to control the tone over the whole range from high string to low string. And then along with that is the ability to mute. And this is an interesting thing because I remember having a conversation with Richard Bornman a couple years ago on the Guitar Forum. Richard's a great player, by the way, so I'm not disparaging him at all. In fact, he's actually one of my heroes in terms of incorporating hybrid picking. And if you haven't heard him, you should check him out. Fabulous player. But he contended that you had to have that touchdown of the pickguard in order to be able to get an effective string muting for playing with overdrive and so forth and so on. And so for a long time I thought that was true as well, but I discovered now that I can actually mute way more effectively and over the whole range of strings. So if I want to mute string, and I can play fast, I can play slow, and again, I don't feel like I'm encumbered by having to have this reference point at the same time as I'm trying to mute the strings. So that's another thing that to me is really valuable. The other thing I discovered is that when I play rhythm, I don't touch the strings down even previously, and so now that wasn't anything special, but basically what it illustrates is that I don't have to touch my strings down or excuse me, touch my fingers down or pull them up. My fingers and hand is already free, so I can play rhythm or I can play single lines and so forth without having to do any changes to my technique. So those are basically some of the reasons why I changed my technique. And another reason, which is an important one to me but may not be a consideration for the majority of players, I had spinal surgery about 13 or 14 years ago, and in the recovery of the surgery, what ended up happening was I sustained some permanent nerve damage. The nerve that runs from my neck down through the bicep no longer responds. I have about, I think I have about 70% strength in my right arm as I do in the left arm. And so the way that affects my guitar playing, it turns out that when you play from the wrist, it requires some of the bicep in there, and some of the nerves in that area are shot. So after my surgery, I could no longer play from the wrist. And when I was studying with Martino, I used to be able to play just fantastic wide interval playing, sort of like Joe DiOrio meets Pat Martino. And when I was playing in DC in the late 70s and the 80s, I was well known for being able to execute wide intervallic types of things, but playing with a good swing feel and so forth. So after my surgery, I lost that. I lost the ability to do that. And I've worked on it steadily for 12 years or so, and I finally realized I was never going to be able to do that. Again, I was never going to achieve that type of technique with the pick that I once had. But the good news is that with hybrid picking, I can do that. I can play now that's a legato hybrid thing, but and so I can do that kind of stuff and incorporate it. I can incorporate that stuff directly in my playing, play with a decent feel, and not have the issue of my lack of ability to play with the actual wrist playing come into play. Now, when I play the single lines, and if I don't use my fingers, even though I've worked on this and I've tried to force myself to only use the wrist, a lot of the playing seems to be from the arm and no longer the wrist. Although I noticed it's gotten better since I started playing floating style, and I think it's because I'm kind of touching down a little bit of a reference on the low string with the heel of my hand. Which incidentally, you may wonder, well, how does he play on the low string if he's doing that? But when I get down to the low string, I just lift my hand from the low string and it's fine. So it's pretty seamless in terms of that type of thing. And I wanted to play a few lines for you just to give you an idea of some things that in terms of floating and in terms of the hybrid picking that allow you to do some things that you couldn't have done with a pick, or at least not very easily. So one thing is just the wide interval. Like here's an exercise from my book that is a chromatic scale with octave displacement. So that type of thing would be very difficult to play with a pick. You can play it with a pick, but again, you have to have some pretty monstrous, Jonathan Kreisberg or Pat Martino type chops in order to do that. Most of the exercises that are in my book don't have a lot of string skips. They may have wide intervals in terms of playing one note per string. But that particular exercise does have the string skipping. It's a little difficult to play in a standard pick thing. This line, let's see if I can remember it, is something that you can play with alternate picking, and you can play with economy picking. Now, I happen to like this finger style because I'm almost playing it as an arpeggio. And excuse the sloppiness. And basically what that is it's just a minor 11th chord. I skipped a note there. And let me go back and play that chromatic line a little slower for you, since I never did that for you. But that chromatic line, which is so that's a chromatic line, really slow. Another line that is also from my book, that again, this one you could play with alternate picking if you wanted. Then this one is an interesting line because it uses something called the hammer-on from nowhere. And the hammer-on from nowhere is a note that's hammered, but it's not a pull-off and it's not a slur in the traditional way. So the note is just fingered with the left hand without coming from anywhere. So here's the line slow. It goes... And that's the hammer-on from nowhere. And that's an interesting line because you can move it around. It's a little sloppy, but I think you get the idea. So that's just a few examples of some stuff that you can play with the hybrid picking that might be a little bit more difficult to play without touching, or excuse me, might be a little bit more difficult to play when you're using standard alternate picking. And for me, again, that is a number of reasons why I switched to the floating picking type of thing and the hybrid picking. I feel that it makes my playing more versatile. And I wanted to mention one other thing, which is that I don't consider myself like a great vast technique expert. I mean, there are guys that have way more chops than I do. But when I look at this particular avenue of practice and direction I've taken with my playing, I've only been doing this playing with the with my picking change and with the hybrid picking. I've been doing this 3 to 4 months. So I feel like I've made a huge amount of progress in just 3 or 4 months, and I feel like I'm on the path that at some point between 6 and 8 months after I've started this journey, my technique's going to explode and be way, way better than it was before. What I have now is, like I said, about 70% of what I could play previously in terms of just the single line execution. So I think to those people who say, well, I play with a pick and I play with my fingers touching down, and I don't use hybrid picking, and it's just I don't feel like learning that. I think you can learn it. I think if you dedicate yourself and spend a lot of hours working at it and practicing it, and being devoted to it, I think you'll achieve some great results and you'll really improve your playing. And it's just a matter of being unafraid of the change, moving forward with a new direction and trying something and looking out toward a goal of, say, 6 months to a year from now, and not just looking at, well, what can I accomplish tomorrow? And of course you break that down into little pieces, because you don't want to just have a goal that's a year away with no intermediate sub goals to accomplish. So what I look at is the exercises are kind of like little small goals. Like you work on these exercises and you hope to accomplish something with them, and you try to make the arc, though, a long one. It's a long game, and you want to succeed in the long game, and the goals that you have for the long game are more important than the goals of, what you can accomplish in just 1 week. So that's my philosophy about this picking type of thing, and practicing in general, I guess I would say. So anyway, my name is Jack Zucker, and I'm the author of Sheets of Sound for Legato Guitar. You can check out my website, sheetsofsound.net. I've got a lot of free lessons up there and material, and feel free to contact me and let me know if there's something else you'd like to see or hear. Thanks. Signing out.